What's going on, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians, runners, joggers? I guess now you'd be sprinters because you're sprinting to the finish line of being a dead game. Yeah, that's bad. Anyways, Joker back again once again, or this guy's favorite twink back again once again. And today, people, So, in our last thrilling episode of As the Bungie Burns, we got out our spinfoil hat and tackled the rumors that Sony had cut Bungie's marketing. But why would Sony do this? I wonder, I sit here all a wonder. Throughout the video, we explored a handful of reasons why Sony might do that. But one reason kept coming back to me, even after I'd finished recording the video. It was that Sony is playing 4D chess with Bungie management, setting them up to fail. But again, that would hurt Sony. So why would Sony do that? Well, why does any multi-billion-dollar corporation do anything?
Money.
And at the end of the day, I can't really blame Sony. Bungie management did this to themselves. They bought into their own hype.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
And their downfall will be delicious, or I guess bittersweet, because we all know they're escaping with golden parachutes. But Joker, I hear you cry out in your shrill, tremulous voice, it's not just management, it's the developers too. Look, I'm gonna say what I've always said about this. I don't care if Karen at desk 357 comes up with the most dog water story ever written, the worst lore, the worst gameplay, the worst piece of art, the worst weapon design, the worst armor design. If it makes it into the game, the chain of management, the chain of checks and balances are ultimately what failed. Nuance! I know, right? Gas, shock, horror, lightning crackle, lightning crackle, lightning crackle. I'll use an example. I think we can all agree, even if you don't personally like Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV is one of the best MMOs on the market. Numbers don't lie. And I would hope that my general audience would be able to give credit where credit is due, even if they don't care about something. Now, when Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 first released, it shit the bed harder than Amber Heard. Yoshi P was then brought in, and he directed A Realm Reborn, saving Square Enix from one of the biggest financial blunders in their company's history.
We burn it. Nanny. The game. The server. The engine. Burn every last one of them.
Then we got Heaven's Ward, which in my opinion is the best story ever told in Final Fantasy XIV, because it's Game of Thrones with more dragons. It literally starts because a red wedding-esque event known as the Bloody Banquet. Then Stormblood was Stormblood. Storm of mid, bored of mid, fuck all this fucking bullshit. The DLC's fucking lame, can't believe it's in the game, fuck all this fucking bullshit. Then we got Shadowbringers, which is actually the best DLC in Final Fantasy XIV. Endwalker was a thing that happened.
Let him cook now.
It's not bad per se.
Let him cook.
But the entire DLC is carried very much so by some emotionally gripping moments.
I said let him cook.
And hurt by, hey, the world's ending, and that's nice, but you gotta talk to these 6 people about things that are completely and utterly irrelevant to saving existence. Then you have to do that like 30, 40 times. Not bad, mind you, but boy, was it padded. Then we got Dawn Trail. And Dawn Trail, from a narrative standpoint, is just bad. The battle content, however, the battle content has cooked. Protect that team at all cost. Now, of course, I could lament the writer, and old Joker probably would have. But ultimately, the buck stops with Yoshi P. I don't care that Yoshi P was distracted with making Final Fantasy XVI. The buck stops with him. That's it. And I could also go further and say that Square Enix management, just in general, doesn't give the Final Fantasy XIV team enough resources to really properly invest in the game. But again, that's a management problem, not a rank and file dev problem. Same thing goes with Destiny and Marathon. Can individual rank and file devs be toxic to the entire development process? Absolutely. But who hired them? Who allowed them to keep their jobs? Who gave them more work? Who gave them more responsibilities? Management. Duh. But Joker, I hear you cry out once again. If these bad actors don't get what they want, they'll just abuse HR. Well, in the case of Bungie, you can't really make that argument because we know HR wasn't doing their job. And from every ounce of reporting that we've seen about Bungie HR, they actively protect management. Ultimately, the point is good management will weed out bad rank and file because they have a responsibility, not just to the players to create a good product, not just to the board of directors to earn them fat stacks, but to the other rank and file. They have to make sure that the other rank and file can buy food, pay bills, keep making money. Good management will weed out anyone that threatens the stability of the whole. Bad management will let those bad actors flourish. Bad management will allow the entire company to fall on their sword just to indulge the whims of a couple of bad actors. Good management doesn't put up with that shit because good management knows that hundreds, if not thousands of people's jobs depend on them making good decisions. Decisions that are good for both the players and the board of directors. That said, the C-suite executives, of course, will always be the biggest issue. And this is somewhat of a universal thing. Now, I know that this next segment is kind of a non sequitur because we're talking about EA's C-suite, but if you look at what they do and how they think, and you look at how Bungie acts, could you really tell the difference? I'm not saying, I'm just saying. Dragon Age creator says EA thought BioWare fans would eat whatever slop they were given, since the nerds in the cave will always show up for an RPG because it was an RPG. Quoting, with EA bosses convinced that the nerd cave would spill out its denizens to any game with a BioWare on the box. Their philosophy became that you don't have to try and appeal to them, you had to worry about the people who weren't in the cave, which was the audience they actually wanted, which was much larger. And you know what? I believe that. I believe that EA executives thought that way. But at the end of the day, the game director was the one who okayed the game every step of the way. They were the one who, to abuse a quote, directed the game to be written like HR was in the room. That said, this is also from David, Crash Out on the Fanbase Gator, who has basically burned any and all credibility and seems to be clawing back some vestige of trust by throwing his former bosses under the bus. But as the saying goes, a broken clock can be right twice a day. Point is, there's a reason that a lot of games end up the way that they are, and seldom are those reasons the rank and file. And even if you want to blame the rank and file, there should be checks and balances in place that stop any bad actors from actualizing their vision. And if those visions that people want to attribute with hurting their games and their franchises are, in fact, hurting their games and franchises, well, who allowed that vision to foster? Who believed that vision, who believed that direction was a winning goal? And why did they believe that? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, all C-suite execs want is more money. Now, I could most definitely cut the video there and make it its own segment, but you guys like longer videos, so just think of this as a 2-for-1. Get it, got it good? Moving forward. According to reporting done by Paul Tassi on his YouTube channel,
I heard this needed to be in the top 5 of like NPD sales for the year if it's going to be a success or considered a success. Crazy. No way. There's no way. Another reason you're not going free to play, but like that seems impossible to me. I don't even know what to say. So it will not be literally Concord, but it will still be bad.
And I'm gonna have to agree with Paul there. Crazy, no way, you're mad. It's not happening. It's insanity.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
For starters, just let's look at Marathon logistically. It's a weird-ass looking game, right? Like, there's no getting around it. It looks weird. A lot of people are not going to vibe with the Apple, Corpo Punk, metrosexuals in space aesthetic. However, I do think people could get past that if they could create their own character. So loot in a game that kinda sorta hinges on loot becomes less valuable. Like, why do I care about how my character looks? Why do I care about what loot I get if it doesn't matter? If I have very little input into the customization of my character past opening my wallet. And I'm sure there's people that are going to be like, but Joker, it's a first-person shooter. How your character looks doesn't matter. And they're full of shit. Because if how your character looked in a first-person shooter didn't matter, cosmetics in first-person shooters wouldn't be a multi-billion-dollar industry. It might not matter to you. It may not even matter to me. Congratulations, Cupcake. We're super special, awesome snowflakes who don't care about how our character looks like in a first-person first-person shooter, except we all do, everybody does to some extent, and it wouldn't be a multi-billion-dollar industry if basically everybody didn't care. If nobody cared, first-person shooter games wouldn't have cosmetics outside of maybe the way the weapon looks. I know, gas shock, horror, lightning crackle, revelation. It's almost like 2 + 2 = 4. So not only do you have a very weird-looking game, but the premise of the game is antithetical to the already established Bungie player base. You have this game where you collect all this loot, and the point of the game is to eventually lose the loot. And I have to imagine it's not just antithetical to Destiny players, it's antithetical to players in general. Oh yeah, I'm absolutely sure that there's people who like these aspects of these games, where you lose all your stuff, win big or go home. But there's also people who go into massive amounts of debt because of gambling. It is a thing, it's a notable part of human psychology, we all know this. But I don't think I have to tell anyone, it's also not a very large portion of the population who's wired like this. So based on premise alone, Bungie was always fighting an uphill battle to get a large market audience. Then you start dumbing the genre of game down, so you're pushing away the hardcore of the hardcore for what? Casual players who have no interest whatsoever in wasting time in a game with nothing ultimately to show for it? Make it make sense. Are you doing this for content creators who will waste time in these games and hopefully sell it to their audience? Because that's what it seems like to me. That seems like the only audience for this game. Content creators who they wined and dined and brought out to play the game. So what's going on here? And I think the best part of that is the content creators who they wined and dined and brought out to advise on and promote the game didn't even last a week after the reveal. It's silly. You can't make this shit up. And then on top of all those fundamental barriers to entry, the icing on the cake looks disgusting. Like characters and designs and levels just look weird. And you know what? Personally speaking, I don't mind it. But my aesthetic and my taste has always leaned towards goth and cyberpunk. I'm not the majority when it comes to my personal fashion taste. And while I don't think you necessarily have to go as far as every character must be fuckable, see how that worked out for First Descendant, every character does have to look interesting and appealing. It just so happens that if you happen to appeal to the various fetish markets, you'll probably do better, at least in the short term. God damn! No. Hold the phone buzz back. Is that enhanced? Oh no. Did they? Okay! That's a thing that exists. Oh, don't look at me that way, Destiny community. I've seen what makes you cheer. But as I am off one to do, I digress. At the end of the day, Marathon was a niche game with a niche art style for a niche community. There was no way in hell, just based on that premise alone, it was going to be one of the top 5 sellers of 2025. Like, I don't even think people who are diehard support for this game, who are like ride or die for Marathon when it was first revealed, believe that it would even be one of the top 10 or 20 selling games of the year. Most logical, reasonable people, like myself, believe that it would do okay, that it would make niche genre money because it's a niche genre game with a niche genre aesthetic, and you know what? It would do okay. Why would Bungie make a niche genre game with a niche genre aesthetic if they wanted anything other than niche genre money? And now, in the wake of all the controversies that have popped up around Marathon, well, like I said in my last video, Marathon had to be one of the top 5 selling games in 2025 to even be considered a success.
You serious?
Which more than likely wasn't going to happen before the reveal, and sure as shit isn't going to happen now. I don't care if they make Glitch barefoot with her big naturals flopping around like she just got the First Descendant update. It's not going to happen. Now, to be 100% clear, we don't know when this standard that Marathon has to be a top-selling game in 2025 was set, but we can at least assume that it was before the Marathon reveal. Now, 2025 is stacked. At the time of the Marathon reveal, there was the announcement of the Switch 2, which is going to eat a lot of people's disposable income. You'll have Mario Kart, Mario Party, there's going to be a Pokemon game this year, there's also a Donkey Kong game or something like that. I don't know, I wasn't paying attention to the Switch 2 reveal. I don't even currently play my Switch and haven't since Pokemon Sword and Shield, so the reveal just kind of went over my head. Sorry. Outside the Switch 2, however, you have Borderlands 4, which was probably on track to do great and still will will probably do great, but I do not envy 2K and the Borderlands marketing department, because every time Randy Pitchford gets out there and opens his mouth, well, it's like a magic trick. Then there was Grand Theft Auto 6 before it was delayed, and then Death Stranding 2 on the beach. There's the Metal Gear Solid Delta remake, remastered, re-something. Then there's the Elden Ring DLC, which I'm hearing mixed things on. And then there's games already making bank, like Monster Hunter Wilds or Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which nobody saw coming. And all of this is before we get into games that people are already playing. Destiny 2 is going to have 2 DLCs this year. Both of them are going to be $40 a pop, at least. I think the collector's edition is $120 or something like that. I have not looked into it at time of recording. I know. I stopped pre-ordering Destiny DLC, but I digress. All things considered, at least in regards to the way that this information was handed down to us, it does make it come off as a Bungie initiative, not necessarily a Sony initiative. So essentially, for all intents and purposes, you have Bungie management sniffing their own farts, believing that everything they touch is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And they're the ones setting unreasonable goals. But I guess I can't blame them. After all, Sony bought Bungie for nearly $2 billion more than they were worth. And I have to imagine that Sony was none too pleased when that $1.6 billion that was meant to retain employees just kind of vanished, wasn't used for what it was supposed to be used for, and then suddenly you have Bungie missing goals and laying off staff, the staff that you paid $1.6 billion to acquire. Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to imagine that Sony not too happy. But also, getting back to Bungie's ego, it's also sort of the player's fault. Destiny 2 and the cult of fanboys that rally to that game's defense every time there's criticism or controversy leveled at it, I'm pretty sure that didn't disabuse Bungie of the idea that they could get away with murder, proverbially speaking. And now we have Marathon. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair indeed. Now, of course, one does wonder where those expectations came from. Was it really a Bungie mandate, like we've gone over, or could it have been a Sony one? Each of these possibilities has their own merit, and there are pragmatic reasons that Sony would set Bungie up to fail. Or if Sony didn't set these standards up for Bungie to fail, they sure as shit didn't step in to disabuse Bungie of their stupidity, of their ego, of their arrogance. Now, why would Sony do that? Well, if Bungie fails to meet goals, hypothetically, allegedly, Sony can come in and clean house, and Marathon is the avenue by which they have legal justification to do that. Sony could likely clean house right now, just regardless. I mean, they own the studio, they can do what they want. But then everybody sues Sony. So Sony needs an avenue by which they can clean house and also demonstrate Bungie's failures. And Bungie does have a lot of failures since the Sony acquisition. For starters, you have the continuous decline of Destiny 2. And then you have the abject failure that was Concord. And I know, it's beating a dead horse to talk about Concord at this point, but this demonstrates the inability for Bungie to help Sony bring a single games as a service game to market. At best, all they've been able to do is help Sony cancel projects that have had millions of dollars already poured into them, but not produce something that creates profit. And on top of that, the Concord failure, which cost Sony $400 million, if not more, has Bungie's fingerprints all over it. Not only is the studio staffed by former Bungie employees, but I hadn't really looked at Concord until I started making marathon videos, and the first trailer, what do I see? I see a game that looks like a reskinned Destiny. And this is the game that Bungie said, yep, give it the green light, we're shipping this one. The game that was also staffed by former Bungie employees. Funny how that Nepo baby worked out, or I guess in this case, just like with most Nepo babies, didn't work out.
So, yeah, I can't imagine Sony is anything resembling happy about, well, any of this whatsoever at all. In fact, we got a glimpse of how Sony really feels about a year ago, when Sony's CEO blasted Bungie about their business-making decisions, but stating that the rank and file are, quote, highly motivated, showing great creativity, as well as an impressive knowledge of live services. But, and I do mean big booty bitches but, quoting, I also felt that there was room for improvement from a business perspective, with regards to areas such as the use of business expenses. You know, like the, 1.6 billion with a B dollary dues that was meant to, I don't know, do something as silly as retain the talent that Sony had bought Bungie for. Silly. Just silly goose. But I digress. Let's go back and start that quote over. I also felt that there was room for improvement from a business perspective with regards to areas such as using business expenses and assuming accountability for development timelines. I hope to continue the dialogue and come up with some good solutions. Chat! He's just like me, for real, for real. Does this also mean that he's a, generational Destiny hater, or whatever the fanboys like to say? It seems we have found a kindred spirit. What's going on, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians, runners of all ages? Future Joker back again once again. So, the PlayStation State of Play just ended. And of course, in my opinion, the stealer of the show was the Final Fantasy Tactics Remaster, the best Final Fantasy game ever created. In fact, I was so excited about this remaster that I almost didn't notice Bungie was nowhere to be seen, both in terms of Marathon and Destiny. Weird. Now, hands up. Maybe, just maybe, this means nothing. Bungie did, after all, have their own in-house reveal. At the same time, however, this showcase isn't for us, the people more tuned in to Bungie's shenaniganery. This is for the normies, the people who Marathon desperately need to be sold to. Weird, isn't it? Bungie is a first-party dev, and you would think that it would be in both Sony and Bungie's best interest to have some presence there, to show a united front, given all the shit show that has been going on around Destiny, Marathon, and Bungie. And yet, they're strangely absent. Now, you might argue, all things being fair, that Marathon was cut due to worries of plagiarized material being in the marketing. Fine, fair enough, but Sony's had quite a while to fix that. After all, according to Bungie, this was just a couple of decals on one decal sheet. Really, how hard would it have been to fix that? Refilm the bits of marketing that use gameplay and then ship. But fine, let's say, for the sake of argument, that somehow, someway, through some Herculean leap in logic that us mere mortals will never be able to comprehend, let's say that Sony is going to scrap all that marketing and start from fresh, investing millions of more dollars into it instead of buying an artist off. Okay? Fine, fair enough. Seems pretty dumb to me, but what do I know? There's still Destiny, and Destiny's about to start a new saga. Why wouldn't you show that off? Why wouldn't you at the very least, show the trailers off that you've already made for Destiny, just to show a united front, just to show that Sony and Bungie are still lockstep? Why wouldn't you do that? Why would you have no Bungie presence at all? More so right now when, at time of recording, Bungie has already started its creator push to hype up the Fates DLC. I get why you might be hesitant to have Marathon there, but why wouldn't you have Destiny? It makes no sense. Now again, maybe it's nothing. Or maybe those reports of marketing not existing in certain territories for Marathon are more than just rumors. Either way, from the spectator standpoint, outside looking in, not seeing a united front between Bungie and Sony when it comes to Marathon and Destiny does not instill confidence in the product. In fact, to me, I go, that's kinda weird. After all of these controversies, why are they hiding Marathon and Destiny? Weird. Again, to be 150% clear, I'm not saying it means anything. I'm just saying it's another point on the graph that should be considered given everything else that's happened. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Remember to like, but only if you did. Subscribe for more. Feel free to donate to my Patreon if you're feeling particularly generous. But above all else, stay frosty.